welcome back to The Explainer. When we dive into the historical sources, it's literally mind-blowing to discover how an 18th century strategy of economic and asymmetric warfare completely broke the mighty Mughal Empire. We're talking about one of the most overlooked, yet absolutely brilliant strategic minds in history, Maharani Tarabai. Today, we're going to see exactly how she used strict administration and economics, rather than just sheer force, to bring a literal superpower to its knees. So to really wrap our heads around this, we have to look at this totally fascinating paradox. Imagine Emperor Aurangzeb. He's the ruler of this massive Mughal empire, and he is obsessively pouring resources into conquering physical forts. But meanwhile, his adversary, a 25-year-old widow, is economically conquering his richest provinces right behind his back. It's the ultimate David and Goliath story, right? Except this one was fought with ledgers instead of just swords. To see how she actually pulled this off, we gotta start back in the year 1700. And this was basically the absolute darkest hour for the Maratha Empire. The sheer arrogance of the Mughal Empire here is honestly staggering when you look at the records. Back in March 1700, the Maratha king Rajaram Maharaj tragically died of a lung disease. He was only 30 years old. And right after that, the Mughal historian Kafi Khan actually recorded the mood in their camp. As you can see from the quote, they basically thought conquering a widow and 2 children would be a walk in the park. They genuinely believed the Maratha Empire was completely finished, just assuming the surviving queen, Maharani Tarabai, would, surrender, or just retreat into grief, while they were about to get a terrifying wake-up call. Because the odds were, frankly, impossible. Just picture this. On one side, you've got the Mughal Empire, boasting a 500,000-strong army, vast imperial resources, and heavy artillery. And on the Maratha side, a dead king, a lost capital, and the true heir to the throne, Shahu, who had actually been imprisoned by the Mughals for over a decade. Looking at that sheer disparity in size and resources, yeah, it's pretty obvious why the Mughals assumed victory was guaranteed. But Tarabai? Incredibly, she picked up a sword, crowned her 4-year-old son, and took total control of her fractured forces. Her very first move was absolute genius. Knowing full well she couldn't just fight 500,000 men head-on, she initiated a really calculated peace offer. She essentially proposed surrendering key forts to the Mughals. But in exchange, she asked for the legal right to collect taxes in the Deccan region, plus a high military rank, a 7,000 mensab, for her young son. Diving into the history, it's pretty clear this was a brilliant, deceptive ploy just designed to buy her time to reorganize. But Aurangzeb, completely blinded by his own pride, swiftly rejected it and demanded unconditional surrender. He really had no idea he just challenged a wounded lioness. Okay, so what happens when diplomacy fails? Well, Tarabai had noticed something. She realized Aurangzeb loved buying forts with heavy bribes after long, exhausting sieges. So she completely flipped the script. She ordered her commanders to fight fiercely, sure, but right before their supplies ran out, they were instructed to accept the Mughal bribes and just hand the fort over. The Mughals would march in, empty their own treasury to pay the bribe, and then restock the fort with fresh rations and weapons. And then, as soon as the main Mughal army marched away to their next target, Maratha forces would ambush that same fort in the dead of night. By morning, they had their fort back, they had the Mughal bride money, and they had fresh Mughal weapons. I mean, it was an absolutely ingenious trap that literally forced the Mughals to fund both sides of the war. But, pulling off a highly coordinated cat and mouse game like that, it requires ironclad discipline. And the records of Bhimsen, who was actually a Mughal soldier and diarist, point out that Tarabai proved to be an even stricter ruler than her husband. She exerted this incredibly tight administrative grip over her commanders. Without her direct order, a Maratha commander literally couldn't even move a leaf. So she wasn't just some figurehead, she was a master administrator, leveraging her years in hiding to build a completely unshakable chain of command. And that strict discipline really laid the foundation for her grand strategy. Tarabai realized that playing defense in the mountains of Maharashtra just wasn't going to cut it. If the Mughals were burning her lands, well, she decided to go ahead and drain their bank accounts. She shifted entirely to an offensive economic war. Her forces actually invaded the absolute wealthiest Mughal provinces of Malwa and Gujarat. And by cutting off critical Mughal supply lines in those specific regions, she intentionally induced starvation and halted wage payments for the Mughal troops. She was literally systematically bankrupting her enemy from miles and miles away. Now here is where her administrative brilliance truly shines through. Tarabai didn't just raid these wealthy territories like a bunch of bandits. She instituted formal administrative reforms to systematically siphon off that wealth. She appointed specific officials directly modeled on the Mughal bureaucracy itself, so you had the Kamaishtars for general revenue and the Radhars for toll taxes on the roads.
By creating these official roles, she was instituting law and order under her own banner. She turned chaotic raids into a predictable, highly devastating revenue stream that directly funded her own army.
Which brings us to the absolute core of her entire campaign: parallel administration. Think about this. While Emperor Aurangzeb was thousands of miles away from his capital, just wandering the forests trying to capture, Tarabai established a fully functional Maratha government right inside his most profitable territories. She was taxing the Mughal Empire from the inside out. This administrative stranglehold basically meant Mughal citizens were practically funding the Maratha resistance. It completely starved the Mughal military machine of its absolute lifeblood: money. And that right there is how you outmanage a superpower. Her incredibly strict administrative control even extended to cultural preservation. Take October 1703, for example. She issued a very strict order forbidding her own Maratha army from setting up camp in the village of Chinchwad. Now, why would she do that? Because she knew the ruthless Mughal army was hot on them trail. If her troops camped there, the Mughals would follow, they'd loot the village, and they'd destroy the highly revered local Ganesh temple. It just shows this fascinating level of administrative foresight. Even in the middle of a brutal, existential war, she was looking ahead, managing her troops, and actively protecting the cultural morale of her people. But of course, an asymmetric war like this had terrifyingly close calls. In 1706, the unthinkable actually happened. Mughal forces managed to capture Maharani Tarabai in a sudden attack. As you can imagine, the Mughal camp went wild with celebration. They thought this decades-long war was finally over. But their joy lasted exactly 4 days. Her loyal commander, the Naji Jadhav, launched this massive, completely devastating night ambush. Amidst all the chaos, the Marathas slaughtered the Mughal forces and managed to rescue their queen completely unharmed. That single, shocking reversal, it permanently shattered whatever was left of Mughal morale. So, by the end of this incredibly grueling campaign, the damage to the empire was totally irreversible. Emperor Aurangzeb had lost over 20% of his entire massive army. He'd completely drained his imperial treasury, squandered a quarter of his life, and spent 27 fruitless years just wandering around the Deccan mountains. And it was all because he completely underestimated the administrative genius and the economic warfare of a 25-year-old queen. The psychological toll of Tarabai's asymmetric warfare is just starkly evident in Aurangzeb's final despairing letters to his son Azam Shah, which were compiled in the Ruqaat-i-Alamgiri. He literally admits he failed as a protector of his empire, noting that he was leaving only sorrow and regret behind. The guy was so utterly terrified of the relentless Marathas that he even resorted to handing out magical amulets to his terrified soldiers. Ultimately, in March 1707, he died in Ahmednagar as a completely broken man. Now, Aurangzeb's death definitely marked the end of the immediate threat, but the political chessboard shifted once again. The Mughals, finally utilizing diplomacy instead of war, released the long-imprisoned Maratha heir, Shahu. And this was a calculated move that triggered a really complex civil war. Tarabai argued the empire she saved was essentially a new one built by her husband, while Shahu claimed legal birthright. She faced some profound betrayals. She was imprisoned by her own co-wife, and she even faced the tragic death of her son. Yet, displaying that exact same iron will we've been talking about, she survived it all. She established a parallel court in Kolhapur, signed a peace treaty with the ruling Peshwas in 1752, and lived to the formidable age of 86.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want you to consider this. We all love tales of clashing swords and massive battlefield heroics, but Tarabai's legacy proves something entirely different. It proves that brilliant administration, strict discipline, and a cunning economic strategy can actually be far more devastating than sheer military might. She didn't just fight an empire, she outmanaged it, she out-taxed it, and she outlasted it. So what other historical victories have been won not with a sword, but with a ledger? Something to think about until next time.